And don't build a life so consumed with earthly success that your soul becomes bankrupt before God. The goal is not to die with the most toys. I think of the bumper sticker, he who has the most toys wins. Well, that man still dies. The title's going to fade, applause fades, the bank account fades. But what is done for Christ will endure forever. So instead of worshiping success, we steward it. Instead of chasing possessions, we should pursue obedience. And instead of demanding more, we should cultivate gratitude. And that's why Solomon says to enjoy the daily gifts that God gives. Welcome back to Dotimos and the Daily Sword, where we sharpen men for spiritual battle through the truth of God's word. As we continue our walk through Ecclesiastes, today I'll be covering chapters 5 and 6, and I've titled this, When Success Becomes Slavery, Fearing God in an Exhausted Culture. Chapters 5 and 6, this is where Solomon exposes the emptiness of wealth and shallow worship and restless ambition. He also talks about the house of God here. And let me start off reading, starting in verse 1. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools, but they do not know that they are doing evil. Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. Therefore, let your words be few. Skip to verse 4. When you vow a vow to God, do not delay paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Let not your mouth lead you into sin, and do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your voice and destroy the work of your hands? For when dreams increase and words grow, many there is vanity, but God is the one you must fear. Honestly, this may be really kind of one of the most relevant sections of Ecclesiastes for our generation. We live in a culture that is obsessed with more money, more followers, more influence, more success, more applause. Yet anxiety is skyrocketing. Depression is everywhere. Leaders are burning out. Families are fractured. Churches are more platform driven now. And many men are exhausted trying to build kingdoms that cannot save them. Here, as he talks about the house of God, before we go into kind of the vanity of wealth and honor, it's important to note here that the house of God is mentioned about 50 times in the Bible. And according to what we're able to determine in the Bible, it took about 183,000 men and 7 years to build Solomon's temple. It says here, guard your steps. It's thought that the steps one was 12 inches and one was 35 inches leading up to the temple. And it was believed that they did that so that you couldn't kind of just run up in a hurry. You kind of had to take your time and watch your steps. And that, in a way, is the way we should approach God, right? We should slow down our pace. We shouldn't be in a rush to get to church thinking, oh, well, hurry up. Hopefully the sermon's not too long. We can get the sermon out of the way, get to lunch, or I can get home, watch the football game, watch the Masters golf tournament, whatever it may be. But rather approach God with reverence and awe and approach him slowly, right? And intently. So he also talks here, obviously, about making a deal with God. And we're all guilty of this. Lord, if you just please let me get this job, please, if we can just get pregnant and just have a child, then. And it's always a kind of promise for, right? It's God, I'll do this if you do this for me. And, God's not a genie in a bottle where you rub the lamp and then, get what you want and then try to get back to him, because we know we're going to fail. Like, we're not going to hold up our end of the bargain, which is why he talks about here, pay what you owe, but don't make a vow kind of haphazardly. So, as he opens Ecclesiastes by talking about, guarding your steps and being and speaking about vows, it's about it. We don't need to approach God casually. We don't need to come to worship pretending, come trying to negotiate with God. When I think of worship, yes, we want to be lifted up. We want to be, into the song, into the music, and feel or leave feeling fulfilled. At the same time, we should be feeling drained, because we should want to pour out everything we have to the Lord. Think about the tax collector and the Pharisee and Sadducee who's saying, "Hey God, at least I'm not like that guy." And the tax collector is the one beating his chest, saying, "I'm a sinner," and can't even look, raise his eyes to God because he's in such shame. Right? That's the humility that we need to have, poor in spirit. That we're just so spiritually drained in a good way, not in a bad way, but that we're spiritually bankrupt. As John MacArthur kind of talks about it in one of his books I'm reading, that we need to come in full awe of the Lord and come listening more than talking. And so Solomon says that, fools are full of words, but wise men fear God. And that hits hard in today's culture, because we've created an environment where everybody has a microphone. I have a microphone, right? But very few have reverence. Many people want God to endorse their plans instead of surrendering to his will. I've struggled with that. But God's not my consultant. He's my king. He should be your king. And Solomon reminds us that God is in heaven and we are here on earth. And that one verse should crush pride because it confronts the modern illusion that intelligence, wealth, influence, political power somehow make someone sovereign. The reality is that a man can build an empire but still lose his soul. And Solomon talks about that ad nauseum. We've watched it happen in politics, business, ministry, entertainment, even the church. Or public success without private surrender eventually will collapse under its own weight. Solomon then pivots into one of the great traps of humanity, which is the love of money. Notice it doesn't say that the one who has money, it says the one who loves it. And money itself is a tool. And when money becomes your identity, your security, right, or worship in a way, then it becomes a very cruel master. And that's our current modern condition right now. People are sacrificing marriages for careers, children for ambition, integrity for status, peace for accumulation. And Solomon says that wealth multiplies possessions, but possessions will multiply anxiety. A man spends his entire life building things that he cannot take with him into eternity. And so then, moving into chapter 6, it gets even more sobering, where Solomon describes a man who has everything, has riches, possessions, honor, everything that the world says will make him happy, but he can't enjoy any of it. Right? Part of me thinks that Solomon's talking about himself, but that's terrifying because it means success without God still leaves the soul starving. You can sit in your 6,000 square foot luxury home and still feel and be empty. You can lead a company worth billions and still feel purposeless. You can fill stadiums at concerts and arenas and still feel alone. Why is that? Because the human soul was designed for God, not achievement. It was designed to be in a relationship with the Lord. Men who are told to chase the bag, dominate the market, build the brand, crush the competition, is what really consumes us and overwhelms us in today's culture. But Solomon says wandering desire is never going to end. Kids want toys. Adults just want more expensive toys. But your kid constantly nags you for that toy. When he gets it, yeah, he plays with it for a minute. Then what happens? He's off to his next toy. And so that line should convict all of us that we just are adults with more expensive toys. And the danger is this, that when desire rules a man, peace will disappear. The soul becomes spiritually anemic. And we always search for the answer. And what's that answer? It's to fear God, not terror, right? Jesus talks about it's a reverence for God. To fear God means to live with surrendered awe before him. It means understanding that life is short, eternity is real, and every blessing comes from God's hand. And so Solomon says life is like a shadow. And that means that the luxury house is going to fade. It's going to go away. It's going to burn down. The title's going to fade. Applause fades. The bank account fades. But what is done for Christ will endure forever. So instead of worshiping success, we steward it. Instead of chasing possessions, we should pursue obedience. And instead of demanding more, we should cultivate gratitude. And that's why Solomon says to enjoy the daily gifts that God gives. So men, what I would say to you today is thank him for today. Thank him for your provision. Thank him for the breath in your lungs. Thank him for your family, your work, your trials, and even the refining seasons that you're going through and that you've gone through in life. Because a grateful man is harder for the enemy to enslave, as we talked about. And men listening today, don't wait until retirement to live faithfully. Don't wait until you, quote unquote, arrive to become thankful, right? Because you'll never arrive. And don't build a life so consumed with earthly success that your soul becomes bankrupt before God. The goal is not to die with the most toys. I think of the bumper sticker, he who has the most toys wins. Well, that man still dies. So the goal is to die faithful. So men, put on the full armor of God, stay sharp, stay watchful, and fear the Lord above all else. This is Dokimos, and this was the Daily Sword. Thank you, men.